It was 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes before Mike's shift ended. He'd been the night cashier at Miller's gas station for a few months now, working late to save up for school. Miller's was the kind of place that stayed open 24/7, lit up only by buzzing, dim lights and the yellowed glow of the gas pumps. It was isolated, surrounded by nothing but empty road and fields that stretched out into the dark like an endless ocean of shadow. On this particular night, something felt off. The place had its usual quirks, mysterious footsteps on the roof, the fridge lights flickering for no reason, and the faint sound of whispering from behind the shelves. Mike had learned to ignore these things. He figured it was just the building's age getting to him. But tonight, there was something else. Something heavier. Mike glanced up at the security monitors, the screens jittering with static now and then. They showed each corner of the station's perimeter, the empty parking lot, the pumps, the deserted road, and the inside aisles lined with snacks and drinks. But when he looked at the screen showing the pumps, he froze. There was a figure standing by pump 4, a woman, her clothes dark and loose, her head slightly tilted. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but she was still there when he opened his eyes. Mike squinted, trying to make out her face, but it was shrouded in shadow. She wasn't moving, wasn't even looking around, just standing there, staring straight at the gas pump. The monitor flickered, and she was gone. Just as he was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a soft chime rang through the station, signaling that someone had entered. He turned, half expecting to see her walk in, but the entrance was empty. The doors had swished open, but no one was there. A chill crept down his spine. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaky. The only response was the low hum of the fridges and the faint buzzing of the lights. He glanced at his phone. 11:52 p.m. His shift was almost over. He just had to wait it out for a few more minutes. Suddenly, there was a loud clang from the storage room in the back. Mike jerked up, his heart pounding. It sounded like metal against metal, a noise that shouldn't have come from anywhere inside. Gathering his nerve, he walked slowly toward the storage room, each step echoing in the silence. He pushed open the door, the small room cold and lined with shelves of cleaning supplies and cardboard boxes. Everything was in place, nothing unusual, until he noticed the small window at the back. It was pitch black outside, yet he could see the faint outline of a face staring in at him, pressed up against the glass. Mike took a step back, his breath hitching. The face was pale, with eyes that seemed too wide, staring directly at him. It looked like the woman he'd seen at the pump, but her features were sharper now, almost exaggerated, like someone had stretched her skin too tight over her skull. And then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone. Panicking, Mike backed out of the storage room and nearly ran into his manager, Mr. Shaw, who'd appeared from seemingly nowhere. His manager was a tall, stoic man, rarely seen at this hour. "Leaving early, are we?" Mr. Shaw's voice was cold, his expression unreadable. Mike stammered, "There's something out there, a woman. I think she was at the pumps, and then she was in the storage room window." Mr. Shaw's face softened, just a little. "I see you've met her. She's part of the station." "What do you mean, part of it?" Mr. Shaw's eyes narrowed. "Some things linger here, left behind. This place, it's not just a gas station." Mike felt a sinking feeling in his gut. He wanted to push for more answers, but Mr. Shaw continued, his voice low and stern. "Finish your shift, Mike, and remember, don't look directly at her if you see her again. She doesn't like to be seen." Just like that, his manager walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the back of the station, leaving Mike alone. The clock on the wall clicked over to 11:59 p.m. 1 more minute. He stayed behind the counter, hoping the time would go faster. But the moment the clock hit midnight, the lights in the station flickered and went out completely, plunging everything into total darkness. In the pitch black, he heard something. A faint scraping, like nails dragging along the floor. His heart hammered as he realized it was coming closer, inch by inch. He remembered Mr. Shaw's warning and tried to keep his eyes shut, but the curiosity was too strong. He opened his eyes just a sliver and saw her standing a few feet away, her face inches from his. Her hollow eyes locked onto his, lips curled into a twisted smile. She was whispering something, but he couldn't make out the words. In the suffocating silence, Mike managed to stumble back, finally breaking eye contact. The lights flickered back on, and she was gone. He was alone, the station eerily still once more. Without wasting another second, he bolted out of the gas station, leaving his work vest behind. As he ran to his car, he glanced back one last time and saw her standing at the entrance, watching him, her face obscured by shadow once more. When he reported the incident the next morning, his coworkers looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. One of them chuckled and said, "You made it through the night, huh? Guess she didn't like you too much." Mike quit the next day. For weeks, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that she was somehow still following him. And every now and then, he'd catch a glimpse of her in his rearview mirror, standing at the edge of his vision, her hollow eyes staring back at him. As far as he knew, Miller's gas station was still open, still welcoming new night workers, and still haunted by something that refused to let go. My shifts at the old gas station were usually quiet, especially during those graveyard hours when the road outside seemed like an endless void. The whole place had an unsettling vibe. It was just a rundown little gas station at the edge of town, with only one flickering fluorescent light above the counter and a heater that barely worked. In the middle of winter, the chill settled into your bones and never left. It was late December, and the station was colder than ever. I'd bundled up, hoping to survive the shift without my fingers freezing, but the air seemed unnaturally frigid that night, even by winter standards. Every breath misted in the air, thick and slow, hanging around me like a ghost. Around 2 a.m., a strange fog rolled in, heavy and dense, swallowing up the road and the surrounding trees. It was rare to see anyone on the road that late, but tonight felt different. Like something, or someone, was lurking out there, waiting in the fog. I was halfway through counting inventory when the door chime rang. I hadn't heard any car pull up, and yet there he was, a man in a worn, thin jacket, his skin pale as frost, eyes hollow and tired. He walked up to the counter without saying a word and slid a $5 bill across. His fingers blue from the cold. "Gas?" I asked, trying to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. The man didn't respond. He just stood there staring blankly, the silence pressing in like a weight. I tried asking again, but he just turned and walked out, disappearing into the fog. Confused, I stepped outside, hoping to see where he went. But the fog was so thick, I could barely see the pump right in front of me. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed faint footprints in the frost, leading toward the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed them a few steps until they vanished altogether. When I turned back, I saw a figure standing just beyond the gas station's light, still and silent. It was the man, but his face was wrong. His eyes were empty, his mouth twisted into a frozen, unnatural smile. The chill around me intensified, an impossible cold that seemed to reach into my lungs, making it hard to breathe. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door, my heart racing as the temperature plummeted even further. The heater, which had been humming weakly, suddenly died, leaving only the buzzing of the flickering light above. Then, the power cut out completely, plunging the station into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the black, and when I swung it toward the counter, I saw him there, staring at me, his smile wider and colder than before. His mouth moved, though no sound came out, but I could feel his words in my head. "It's cold out there. Stay warm." The lights flickered back on, and he was gone. I rushed outside to see if he'd left, but the fog had lifted, and the air was dead silent. The heater kicked back on with a feeble hum, but no warmth followed. The next morning, my manager came in and noticed the footprints I'd tracked in. When I told him what happened, he looked at me, puzzled. "That's impossible," he said. "This place has been abandoned since last winter. They found a guy frozen just outside the station, stuck in the storm. No one's worked here in almost a year." I looked down at the counter where a $5 bill lay, blue with frost, just like his frozen hands. I left the gas station that morning in a daze, clutching the frosted $5 bill in my pocket as proof that the night had been real. My manager's words echoed in my head. This place has been abandoned since last winter. But I had just finished a shift there. My shoes were still caked with snow from where I'd stepped out to follow the stranger's footprints. That night, I tried to forget, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again, twisted and grinning, whispering in my head, "It's cold out there. Stay warm." I tried throwing the $5 bill in the trash, but each morning I'd find it back on my dresser, blue with frost and cold to the touch. It seemed to bring with it a chill that seeped into my apartment, no matter how high I turned up the heat. A few days later, while digging through the local archives at the library, I found an article buried at the back of an old newspaper. It was dated almost exactly a year before, a report about a man who had been found dead just outside the gas station, frozen solid. The name wasn't familiar, but his face was unmistakable. It was him. Heart pounding, I flipped the page, and that's when I found a second article, a story about another death near that station. This time, it was a woman who died in the car while waiting for help to arrive, the heater in her car mysteriously failing. She was also found around the holidays, frozen in place, her face twisted into a strange, cold smile. Each year, around the same time, someone had fallen victim to the chill. I couldn't shake the feeling that the gas station or something within it was cursed. That night, as I prepared for bed, I felt that familiar icy draft seep under my door. And then, just like before, I heard the faint sound of the gas station's door chime ringing from the hallway outside my apartment. The light under the door flickered, casting strange shadows, and then silence. I opened the door cautiously, my breath misting in the frigid air. There, lying on my doormat, was the $5 bill, freshly coated in frost, and next to it was a small handwritten note. "It's cold out there. I'll be back next winter. Keep my place warm for me." Winter had returned, with temperatures plunging and snow blanketing the town. A year had passed since my last shift at that old gas station, but I hadn't forgotten the man, the frozen $5 bill, his twisted smile, and the cold that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Though I had left that job and tried to move on, strange occurrences reminded me that he hadn't left me. It started small, flickering lights, doors left open, an eerie chill that lingered even when the heater was on full blast. I'd even moved apartments, hoping a fresh start would shake the feeling that something was watching me. But that sense of being haunted was impossible to escape. The $5 bill appeared periodically, as if by magic, in the most unexpected places, at my work desk, my car's dashboard, or even tucked into the pages of books I was reading. No matter how many times I got rid of it, it always found its way back. And with each appearance, it felt colder, the frost lingering longer each time. One particularly harsh winter night, I received a call from my old manager, something I never expected. He was almost whispering, his voice shaky. He asked if I could cover a shift at the gas station that night. The regular employee hadn't shown up, and with the snowstorm coming in, he was desperate. A strange feeling settled in my chest, but against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe it was time I faced whatever had been following me. The drive out was unsettling. Snow fell heavily, turning the highway into an endless, blinding white tunnel. By the time I reached the station, the familiar sense of dread had crept back, stronger than ever. The place looked exactly as I remembered it, frozen in time. The old fluorescent light above the counter flickered weakly, and the heater let out a weak hum, barely able to combat the biting cold inside. As I settled in for my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, the fog rolled in, thick and heavy, just like before. My stomach twisted. The memories of that last encounter and the man's face flashed in my mind. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the silence in the station felt oppressive. Every tiny sound, the hum of the heater, the creak of the shelves, seemed amplified, echoing through the empty aisles. And then the door chime rang. I looked up, expecting a customer, but saw nothing. The fog outside made it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the glass, but there was no one there. I brushed it off, thinking it might be the wind, until the chime sounded again, and again, and again. My heart raced as I watched the door, each chime making my skin crawl. Suddenly, I felt a chill that was different from the biting winter air. It was a deep, unnatural cold that settled into my bones. I turned, and there, at the end of one of the aisles, was the figure I had hoped to never see again. The man in the worn, thin jacket, his skin as pale as frost. He stared at me, his eyes hollow and dead, a twisted smile frozen on his face. In his hand, he held a $5 bill, just like the one that had haunted me all year. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear as he slowly walked toward me, each step sounding heavier than the last. "It's cold out here," he whispered, his voice an icy breath that filled the room. "You kept my place warm for me, didn't you?" I stumbled backward, reaching for anything I could use as a weapon, but my hands were numb. The closer he got, the colder the room became, frost spreading across the windows and shelves. I backed into the counter, feeling trapped as his eyes locked onto mine. "You left me out there, abandoned," he continued, his voice barely a whisper but clear in the suffocating silence. "And now, I need somewhere warm to stay." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The frost was creeping over my skin, and my vision started to blur as the temperature dropped even further. Just then, a car's headlights pierced through the fog, illuminating the room and breaking the man's gaze. I heard a voice call out. A customer had pulled up to the pump. I snapped out of my daze, turning toward the light, my senses flooding back. When I looked back toward the man, he was gone, as if he'd melted into the fog. The customer walked inside, oblivious to the freezing cold that gripped the station. I rang them up with trembling hands, trying to steady my breath. When they left, I thought I was safe, that maybe it had just been a hallucination, brought on by my memories and the cold. But as I walked back to the counter, I noticed something on the floor, glinting in the dim light. It was a $5 bill covered in frost, lying exactly where the man had stood. I stared at it, my heart pounding. When I reached down to pick it up, I felt the same cold bite against my skin. Suddenly, the door chime rang again, louder and more insistent this time. But before I could look up, I felt a freezing hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was, inches from my face, his smile more twisted, his eyes darker and hollow. "Don't leave me here," he whispered, his breath colder than death itself. In a panic, I bolted from the station, leaving everything behind. I drove through the snowstorm, headlights cutting through the dark, as the man's face lingered in my mind, his words echoing, "Don't leave me here." When I got home, I tried to shake the fear that clung to me. But as I reached for my keys to unlock the door, I felt something cold in my pocket. My fingers closed around a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out, dread pooling in my stomach. It was the $5 bill, covered in frost. In the weeks that followed, the chill never left me. I kept hearing the door chime in the dead of night and feeling icy breath at my back. And every morning, without fail, I found the $5 bill on my nightstand, as if he was reminding me that he'd always be there. Now, winter is creeping in again, and the chill in my apartment has returned, stronger than ever. I know he's waiting, lurking just beyond the shadows, bound to me like a curse. And I can feel his presence grow colder each night, as if he's drawing closer, biding his time. This winter, I have a feeling he's coming back. For good.